Good evening, everyone. We're going to give folks about 60 more seconds to come on in and get settled and everything. All right, all right. Y'all a good crowd. That was really easy. Thank y'all for that. So good evening again, everyone. My name is Kevin Wyndham. I have the honor of representing the 85th District in the Missouri House of Representatives, which we're sitting in right now, but it encompasses most of the Normandy Schools Collaborative and some of the Rittner area. So thank y'all again for being here and joining us for our event tonight, The Vacant House Next Door, Problems and Solutions in St. Louis County. So this is the first event put together by a group of local partners dedicated to addressing vacancy in St. Louis County specifically. We're so grateful and glad that you all are able to join us in person today, especially the in-person part, right? It's good to see faces in person for the first time in a while. So our goal tonight is to highlight resident voices and to tell y'all a little bit about the work that we've been doing for almost a year now. So time has flown by, but I first contacted Legal Services of Eastern Missouri via Charlie Henderleiter and the Realtors. So it was kind of a natural coalition from the beginning. Probably about a year ago in December of last year. And then, of course, it took us a couple months to really get rolling and have some meetings. But we've had some really productive meetings in the last few months. And this is something that I've been passionate about since before I've been elected, because I'm from the community, and from the time I was a little boy growing up, I lived in this community, and in Hillsdale specifically. And at one point, the neighborhood was full. Everybody lived in a house. Every house on the block was full. And now, on the same street, there's almost too many vacant homes to count off the top of a hand. So I'll stop there. I won't go on a long tangent about that because I can. But I'll just go ahead and introduce our panelists today. And it's going to be a two-part presentation. The first by local housing experts that we have here with us today. And then the second part is going to be more of an interactive conversation led by Alderman Bush. So with that, I'll go ahead and introduce our panelists. First, starting from left to right, Alderman Errol Bush is an alderman in Northwoods. He is also a real estate agent and very involved in housing in the 24-1 area, specifically leading a lot of the housing initiatives in Northwoods, Missouri. To his left is Shantae Jamison. So we've been meeting online exclusively. This is the first time that I've seen Shantae in person. So I just get Shantae and like a headshot every time we meet. But Shantae Jamison. Shantae is with the Problems Property Unit. She's a specialist with the St. Louis County Public Works, specifically in Problems Property. So like I said, it's a great coalition with a great group of folks. To her left is Rachel Waterman. Rachel works with the Legal Services of Eastern Missouri. She's an attorney with the Neighborhood Vacancy Initiative. So with that, I'll go ahead and pass it over to Alderman Bush, or I'm sorry, to Rachel to start off with the presentation, and then after that, we'll go to Alderman Bush for conversation.
Sounds good. Thank you, Representative Wyndham. Can you all hear me? All right, great. So like Representative Wyndham said, it is a little bit weird to be in front of this many people for the first time in a long time, so just give me a little grace while I'm up here. It's really great to see you all here tonight. I'm excited to talk about this issue, and I hope that we can share some information that is new and useful with you tonight. So Shantae and I are going to start by talking about two systems that already exist in St. Louis County that address vacant nuisance properties. One system you might be more familiar with already, and that's code enforcement, and Shantae will talk about that. The other system you might be less familiar with, but actually has a really large impact on vacant problem properties in the county, and that is property tax enforcement. So first, I will hand it to Shantae.
Thanks, Rachel. So, as I'm sure many of you are familiar with the Code Enforcement Division of St. Louis County, and within that division, there's a unit called Problem Properties. And our responsibility is to specifically abate the nuisance properties, and we have different ways of doing that. More than likely, there's a code violation, and even though you all may not be familiar with the code or the ordinances, you know when there's a violation. So generally, we first receive a complaint, and those complaints come from residents, it come from council members, it can come from someone just driving by. We've had that happen before, and they just, see that this is an issue and this is a problem, and so they contact us either by phone or by email to address their complaint. The second thing that we do is we send an inspector out. So we get the address, we get the information, we send one of our inspectors out to inspect the nuisance and determine if there actually is a code violation. The next thing that we do, once a violation has been assessed and a violation, it has been assessed that there is a violation, we then post a notice. Now that notice is posted on the home, and it's also a copy is sent to the owner that it is in violation. We then assign a compliance date. So this is the amount of time that we assign the property owner to abate the nuisance. And that ranges from a lot of different things. It could be hanging gutters, it could be issues with their roof, it could be just high grass or overgrown vegetation, but they have a specific time. Now, we're reasonable, so we know that if it's a structure issue, it's not always easy to find a contractor, so we generally will not give like a 6 day or 7 days to abate that nuisance. We'll generally give them more time. If people contact us, if they're having issues with getting a contractor to fix that issue, of course, we work with them just to make sure that the nuisance get fixed. Then, if the violation is not cured by the compliance date, our abatement team will abate the property. However, we do not abate violations that are on the structure. So we will not replace any hanging gutters, we will not replace any roofs or any siding or anything of that nature. Generally, we abate high grass and overgrown vegetation. If the violation is on the building itself, if that violation is not abated, generally on the structure, a special tax lien is then issued on that property to the property owner. If we abate the high grass or overgrown vegetation, we can also, we bill them for that, right? So we give them a citation for that so that they pay us for that. If they do not pay that within a certain amount of time, then there's a special tax lien that's then put on that property. Next slide. Okay, so here's where the problems lie. All of that sounds good, but what happens when you can't do that stuff, right? So here are the issues that we often face. And I know a lot of you were thinking, they're like, oh, you find the owner, they abate the property, sounds great, right? Why do we have all these vacant properties still? So one of the biggest issues that we're having is we can't find the owners. So they're either hiding behind an LLC, or the last known address, they're not there anymore, or they'll use the address of the property that needs to be abated. And so it's really hard to find their contact information. And so we run into that issue quite a bit. So when we have residents call us and the nuisance haven't been abated yet, we try to let them know, well, here's the issue and here's the problem that we're facing. There's not enough money. right? So I know we hear that a lot, but I'm serious, y'all. There's just not enough money. To demo one property costs between $15,000 to $20,000. That's just one property. And I'm sure many of you know, as I do, because I'm also a resident of North County, there's probably 4 properties on your street alone that probably need to be demoed. You all can do the math on that. And if somebody can find some money to do it, please let us know. We're open to it. The other thing is capacity. So we just don't have enough people to address all of these nuisance properties. There's 2,000 plus and counting properties. We have one person who's responsible for going out and assessing high grass and overgrown vegetation. We have 3 laborers, and we're talking about all of unincorporated St. Louis County, so keep that in mind, not municipalities. Municipalities have their own code enforcement division, so if you live in a municipality, I encourage you to speak with your mayor about any issues that you may be experiencing with vacant properties. And then property maintenance court docket is not always effective. We can't sue an LLC. LLC is a, organization, and you can't do that. So we run into that issue as well. Next slide. So, as a resident, what can you do? If we do our job and we're running into these issues, what can you do as a resident? Well, the first thing that you can do is, if a property has been vacant in your neighborhood for more than 30 days, please reach out to your council person, or you can reach out to the problem properties unit directly. Or like I said, if you're in a municipality, I encourage you to reach out to your city hall, and they should be able to direct you or give you instructions on what to do next. You can use our online complaint if you're in an unincorporated area. And generally, if we get a complaint like from Jennings or a municipality, we'll let you know. So if you just don't know where to go and people contact us, we're pretty good about sending you where you need to go. You can email us or you can call us. So that's what we ask from the residents. And I say 30 days because sometimes people are traveling, or we want to give people enough time. Our goal is not to just keep properties from people, right? We don't want to just take properties from people who own it. We want to be understanding, and we want to be compassionate of the fact that, times are hard sometimes. Sometimes it just takes a little bit longer. I've been working on my house for over a year now, almost 2 years. So I can imagine if the house has been sitting for a while, how much time it may take to get that, house back up to code. So that's my piece. If anyone has any questions, I'll be available afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Shantae. So that was code enforcement. Now I'm going to dive us into property tax enforcement. And what do I mean by property tax enforcement? The central question that we're answering is, what happens in St. Louis County when an owner does not pay their property taxes? So the county has a system in place currently, and that system is that the tax liens that are unpaid will go up for an auction, a public auction. If no one buys those liens at the first auction, they go for a second auction, and then a third auction, and if still no one buys the tax liens, the property is placed on what's called the post-third sale list. So why does that matter? Why is that something we should care about, and what are the problems that it creates? The first problem is that all of the back taxes stay on the property. So say that property has been vacant for several years, the old owner has not paid the taxes for several years, and then it went up for 3 auctions, now it's on the post-third sale list. There could be 6, 7, 10 years of delinquent taxes on that property. If you as a buyer want to buy it from the post-third sale list, you're responsible for paying all of those back property taxes. Those are still there. And then if a property's been vacant for that long, it's probably going to take a decent amount of money to rehab it. That plus the back taxes are going to make that financially infeasible for most prospective buyers. The second problem is that that property stays in the name of the original owner. So the LLC or someone who might have passed away and now their heirs own the property and they don't even know it. That person is still the owner of that property on paper. It's not like once it's on the post-third sale list, the county owns it or the municipality owns it. It's still in that old owner's name. And those people can be really hard to track down. So if you wanted to, make an offer to that person directly, it's probably on the post-third sale list to begin with because that entity or that person is hard to track down. The third problem, and one of the trickiest, is the problem of title defects. So what does that mean? When the county wants to put a property up for auction, or if you buy the property from the post-third sale list, the law says that you are supposed to give warnings, what we call legal notice, to the old owners, any old bank that might have a mortgage on that property, any lien holder is legally required to get a warning that the property is going up for auction or that it's being sold from the post-third sale list. And that doesn't always happen. Maybe the county doesn't give the warning, or they don't give it in the right way, or the person who buys the property doesn't give out those warnings. And when those warnings don't go out in the proper way, the person doesn't get legal notice, that creates what's called a title defect. So what a title defect really is, it's a risk that that old owner is gonna show up, knock on the door of the buyer and say, hey, this is still my property. No one told me that you were auctioning this off. No one told me someone bought this off the post-third sale list. It's still my property. And the reason that matters is because that risk will keep a title insurance company from giving you title insurance on the property. And if you don't have insurable title, pretty much no banks are gonna lend you money to rehab that property. So with a title defect, no title insurance, no money to rehab and rehabilitate, and you won't be able to sell it to another buyer because no one's gonna buy a property with title defects without insurable title. So we have hundreds, probably thousands of vacant properties across St. Louis County. They are all owned by different owners. They're all encumbered with a different amount of property tax debt, so depending on how long the taxes have been unpaid, plus fines and fees, and then a good number of those properties are gonna have this title defect problem that makes them very hard to rehab and very hard to sell. So where does that leave us? It leaves us with the problem all of us are way too familiar with, which is many, many vacant problem properties across St. Louis County that are really difficult to do anything about. So they just sit and get worse and worse. And as residents, neighbors, people who live in the community, you feel powerless to do anything about those problem properties. So that's code enforcement and property tax enforcement in a nutshell. Now I'm gonna hand it over to Mr. Bush to lead us in some Q&A and discussion.
Good afternoon, everybody. Oh, it's evening. It's evening. First of all, I just kind of like to just thank Beyond Housing for putting this this event together this evening. They have been such an awesome part of our community and has done so much work in our community to make it better. And just wanted to just say hats off, to the leaders and the employees of the Beyond Housing organization. They have done so much, for this community, the 24/1 footprint. My charge this evening is to just ask each and every one of you, is there any questions for this fine panelists here on the first part of our presentation? You've heard from them. Now we just like to hear from you if you got questions. And one of our runners will come over and bring the mic. Ms. Eunice?
Yes, my voice carries, but I'll use the mic as well. How can we find the LLCs, the owners of those LLCs, so we can get in touch with them and send those official notices or official correspondence to them? That's been extremely difficult, and I think that would help us a lot if we can find, if we have some roadmap or some procedure where we can find them easily.
Mm-hmm. Rachel or Chantel?
I could talk a little bit about that, yeah. So it's a huge problem, right? We have these LLCs all over the place, and like Shantae said, people hide behind those. They use them intentionally to keep from being tracked. It's hard to track them down, but there are different provisions of the law that tell you what will give those LLCs adequate notice. So this problem of giving out the legally required warnings, there's an answer for that in the law. One answer is that every LLC has to have a registered agent, and that often is not going to be a Missouri registered agent if it's an out-of-state LLC, but it has to have a registered agent, and if the corporation is dissolved, but it still owns property, their last registered agent of record still qualifies as their registered agent for purposes of service of process. So service of notice, those legal warnings, they can go to the registered agent of record, and that will satisfy the legal requirement of having given that LLC a warning. It doesn't solve the problem of all of these LLCs owning these vacant nuisance properties and not doing anything about them. So there is a way to give a warning to these LLCs that meets the requirements of the law, but actually tracking down these LLCs and getting them to be good investors in our communities, that's a whole different problem that, I mean, is a whole different conversation and beyond the scope of my expertise here.
Okay. Any other questions? Right here?
So it's also about the LLCs, because you said you can't sue an LLC. Can you say why not?
Can you get the legal? Okay. So legally, we can't sue an LLC because they're not a person. So if you can't, there's no body to sue. So if I say, oh, well, I want to sue, 24-1 or whatever, if there's no person attached to that, then there's no suit. So generally what happens is for the registered agent, the registered agent will also be the LLC. And when the registered agent is the LLC, we have no person. So that's why.
I'll say that that's probably a housing court thing. Like for
Yeah.
some of the lawsuits that we file as part of the Neighborhood Vacancy Initiative, we do sue LLCs.
Right.
So in
But
some
we do
contexts-
housing court, so we don't do the type of, losses they do. Mhm.
My question is then, why is St. Louis County allowing LLCs to purchase properties if they're not going to provide the appropriate documentation or any type of tracking mechanism, since they are owning property within the St. Louis County area?
You're absolutely right. And that's above both of our pay grades. But
I would suggest that
Yeah.
for consideration is to take that forward. I think this is something that we're chasing that will not be resolved if we don't do something different than what we have done in the past, which leaves St. Louis County properties not as valuable, and the community does not look as well kept. They are not walkable. They become unsafe. And then you get a whole list of other issues that comes from vacancies within the communities.
Okay.
Right, 100% agree. And I think there are legislative solutions to that problem. But like Shantae said, that's an issue for your elected representatives.
Yeah.
How are they going to regulate the LLCs that operate in your communities?
And that's a good question, ma'am. And that's why we're here this evening, because we want to try to discuss other ways on how we can handle that property in our community that we probably have once or twice called upon. And who do we call on for those particular derelict properties in our community? And so that's why we're going to be talking about the land bank this evening. And I think you're going to really, really get a lot of good information on it. It's something that's going to help all of our communities. And how many different communities do we have here this evening that's in the 24-1 footprint?
I'm from the village of Pasadena.
Well, we're so glad to have you. Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Over here, Mayor Collins.
I have a question about the, what is it, a $12 or $14 payment that renews the tax. When someone's falling behind on their taxes, they can pay $12 or $14 and continue to be, I think, current with their taxes.
So that would be a question for the assessor's office. We don't deal with that portion of it. So, yeah.
Mayor McGee?
Yes, my question is, can we come up with an ordinance requiring the LLC to register, have a registered person to register that property, and that way we can contact that registered person? Now, my question is, can we hold them accountable for keeping that property up if we have a registered person with the LLC?
I believe the answer to your first question is yes, I think that you can have an ordinance that does that. Whether having a registered agent is actually going to make these LLCs keep their properties up is another question, and it might, but it might not. I mean, you have someone who's more accountable and more local who you can send code violations to and, you know, try to get to comply. But again, like, there are always going to be properties that are abandoned by these bad actors and that they let just crumble and decay, and there has to be some process to deal with that when it does happen.
And I think that, you know, to answer or to make a comment to the second part of your question was, yes, and we should be enforcing even within the ordinance that we currently have. I think one of the issues is, one, is capacity. And Mayor McGee, I'm sure you know, there's more homes than we have people to go out and enforce these things, right? We would spend all day doing this, trying to find these people. So I think we do the best that we can with what we have to try to enforce it the best way that we can. The problem has gotten so out of control that now we're just kind of managing. But until we get to a place where we have people that are designated to do this all day, every day, I think until we get there, it's going to continue to be this vicious cycle of, you know, not finding people in these vacant and abandoned properties.
Okay. Mr. Ditto?
What would an owner do if the property belongs to the city and grass, tree limbs, growing weeds, and the city does not take care of their responsibility and makes the neighborhood look poorly? What can the homeowner do?
Want to tackle that?
Right, so when you're the neighbor of a city-owned or publicly owned house or lot and it's looking bad, is that what you're asking?
I'm asking, the city owns the property and they let it be neglected.
Right. Yeah, and that's a really frustrating problem that I would assume comes from the city's own budget limitations. Maybe Shante can talk about that, because I know the county has its own budget limitations that keep them from being able to tackle these vacant properties, but brings us back to the idea that it's gonna take a really multifaceted approach to address all of these vacant properties. So those properties that are owned by the city, they might be in disrepair partially because the city doesn't have the budget to keep them up, but partially because they're riddled with title defects, like a lot of the vacant properties across St. Louis County. So maybe the city took title to that property not even knowing that it had these title issues, and now they can't sell it or they can't rehab it because it's not insurable title, and that would be another couple $1,000s on top of keeping the property up required just to get the title to that property clear so that something could happen with that property. So that problem of title defects often sort of underlies these other problems and keeps properties from being upkept and rehabilitated. So sometimes people call that problem legal blight. So it's like there's the physical blight that you can see, but then there's these underlying legal problems that are partially causing that. I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
No, that's pretty much it in a nutshell. Like, the scope of our work is within the boundaries of ordinances and state law. And there's things that we cannot do beyond that because it will be illegal. So for instance, personally, I have a property that's on my street, and the person has not paid taxes for about 10 years, right? So now it's post-third.
I'm saying that the city owns the property.
Right, but even if the city owns the property, they still have, I mean, there's still a process that they have to go through to go, get the property cleaned up. And like Rachel said, there's budgeting issues and there's capacity issues. So if the city owns the property, but they don't have enough people to go out and clean the property, then my suggestion would be, if it's been a significant amount of time, reach out to your city again. Reach out to your mayor, contact your city hall. Beyond that, I'm not really sure what else you could do about that.
Okay, our last question on this part of our presentation.
I guess in other words, you're telling us if they don't go after the low-hanging fruit, that they can identify the owner right off the hand, there's nothing can be done. Or there's really nothing that could be done without an extended period of time. So you're saying if you can't find the owner, you can't find the owner through the LLC, that house will stay vacant forever, and nothing will happen until it falls down. And then who's responsible for cleaning up the debris? Is it the city, the county, or the neighbors? So basically, you're saying there's really nothing that could be done for vacant property if you can't find an owner.
And that's why we're here.
Right. I will say that
Basically, you're speaking to the choir.
You're right. You're absolutely correct.
Okay,
it feels that way for sure. It feels that way,
okay.
but we are here to talk about solutions to that
Yes.
problem.
And, okay, and we're going to hold off on this part of the presentation. So if obviously there are other questions, if you can just write those questions down for us, and we'll be getting back with you to give you those answers and our issues and our concerns on those, on the other questions at this time. But right now, we like to just kind of move on with our presentation. Sure, Ms. Williams. Real quick.
In order to fix a problem, you gotta think outside the box. You're saying there's nothing you can do. The city is saying there's nothing they can do. But then we change all that. We change
Exactly.
all that by ordinance, by changing
segue.
the rules and changing the players. You got to start a change. What are you here for? If you can't do anything, what makes us think we can?
That's a great
Exactly,
segue.
Exactly. So we're not here to tell you.
That's a great segue.
Yeah, that's why we're
Right.
here.
You're right, and that's a
You
great
know,
segue.
Yeah.
And I'm not here to tell you that you can't do anything, but I'm here to agree with you completely that the systems need to change. Under the current system that the county uses, it leaves residents very powerless unless you have a bunch of time or a bunch of resources. There is very little that the average person can do under the current system. So the reason that we are here is to think about what other systems exist that do give more power and more voice to the community and more agency over this problem.
Go ahead, Councilwoman, real quickly.
Yes, sir, real quick. So I'm here and I'm not in the municipality, I'm more unincorporated in 4th District. And so what we are doing in the St. Louis County Council right now, so myself and Councilman Tracus took a tour between South County and North County to identify problem properties. And in doing so, we identified some of those properties that we would consider for demolition. But at the same time, there needs, as you said, a multifaceted solution to this. It has got to be multifaceted because it's got to deal with the court system, it has to deal with the law enforcement and the code enforcement, and it also has to do with the office that Shantae currently works in as well. And so all of those entities, we've been meeting for a couple of months now and trying to determine, one, how do we rearrange the current system
I wasn't gonna say anything. I wasn't gonna say nothing.
Okay.
Councilwoman Days, so I'm working, and what I want you
Okay.
all to do too, we're working collectively,
Yes.
right? To come to a realistic solution to this issue, but that's why I'm here today, to hear what you have, to see if there's some, collaboration that we can do.
Perfect.
Thank you so much, Councilwoman. That's all really important. And then the one piece that I wanted to flag is the property tax enforcement system. That's another key piece of the systems that are failing St. Louis County right now. And that's what we're going to talk about the alternatives to tonight.
Yeah. So I'm sorry, I know we focus a lot on the problem, but we kind of wanted to identify that, so before we moved
So
on to
let's
solutions.
focus on the solution.
There
this
you go.
evening. So at this time, we're going to go into our second part of our presentation this evening. And Rachel, you want to
Yeah, I'll take it
get
away.
started?
So these are questions. All right, so, I mean, I heard from a lot of you how extremely frustrating this problem can be, how it feels like you have no agency over this problem. And so we wanted to talk tonight about one idea that other cities and counties within this state and across the country have used to address the problem of vacant properties in their communities, and that's land banking. So what is a land bank? How does it work? Why have other counties and cities used this idea? Why is it helpful? So what a land bank is it's a public entity, so a governmental entity that can take title or become the owner of vacant properties that are tax delinquent that do not sell at the public auction. So right now, those properties that don't sell at public auction in St. Louis County, they just go and they sit on that post-third sale list. With a land bank, those properties that don't sell would go into the land bank, and the land bank would become the owner of those properties. So why is that something that someone might want? The first reason is with a single owner, the land bank, it's easier to track, maintain, and market those properties. So right now it's a pretty fragmented system across St. Louis County. We don't even have a real idea of how many vacant properties there are in St. Louis County as a whole. With a land bank, you have one owner of those properties. That's the owner of last resort for those properties that don't sell at auction. Now you know how many you have. Now you have one entity that's in charge of taking care of those properties, of maintaining them, and of marketing them. So there's one place that people can go to buy those properties. There's one place people can go if they have ideas for how to redevelop those properties. That entity owns them all, so they can bundle them or package them for redevelopment. If there's someone who has an idea for their block and there's a couple vacant properties on their block, the land bank would be the central place for that. The other major advantage is that the back property taxes go away once the property goes into the land bank. So a governmental entity is not responsible for paying property taxes. So once that property goes into the land bank, the back taxes are zeroed out, and if you as a buyer want to go buy from the land bank, you do not have to pay those back taxes. They go away. Why? What does that mean? It means that a land bank can think more broadly about repurposing vacant properties, and it also means it can better respond to the community. Right now, like all of you have said, if you have these concerns, where do you go with those? You go to problem properties, you go to your council person, there's all these different places, and no one has the singular power to deal with those vacant properties. The land bank becomes that entity, it's their main job to deal with vacant properties, and you as the community have somewhere to go to offer feedback. And that place is a public entity, so it's meant to be part of the community and meant to receive that public feedback. So what does the land bank do? It creates common ownership, it gets rid of that back property tax debt, but the problem that it doesn't fix is that title defect problem that I talked about earlier. So remember how someone, the county or the buyer, is supposed to give out those legal warnings or that legal notice before a property goes up for auction or when it's sold off the post-third sale list. Those warnings are supposed to go out. A land bank alone is not going to solve that problem. Part of the reason that the county has that problem is because of the law that the county uses to collect its taxes. So there's multiple different tax collection systems in Missouri that counties can opt into or opt out of. The one that the county uses currently is an administrative system where it's no one's job to supervise the process and no one's job to make sure that those warnings go out before an auction or after a sale from the post-third sale list. One other alternative is a tax collection system. There's already a few that exist within Missouri law. The county could opt into them, and those are court-supervised systems. So under those systems, it becomes the court's job to make sure that those legal warnings go out to the parties who are legally required to receive warnings. So the county sues the property, and once it's sued, it's the court's job to supervise and to make sure that those notices go out. Under court-supervised tax collection, both owners and buyers are better protected. Owners are better protected because if you are the owner of a vacant property and you genuinely want to hold on to that property, this system will make sure that you get a warning before your property is sold at auction. So maybe like you've fallen behind or you've fallen out of touch or you had some health troubles. This system will make sure, the court will make sure that you actually get a warning and you get an opportunity to take your property off of the auction list by paying your back taxes. Paying your back taxes or getting on some kind of repayment plan can take your property off the list before the auction happens. It also protects buyers because if you buy at the auction or you buy from the land bank, you'll know that the warnings went out before the auction ever happened. So that problem or that risk that I talked about earlier, where maybe a bank or an old owner is gonna show up and knock on your door and say, hey, still my house, no one warned me that this was going up for sale. Now you can say, no, you had your chance. I have the record from the court that you received a warning. You didn't take your chance to take it off the list. So because you got legal notice, according to the letter of the law, you missed out and this property is now mine. I legally own it. And it's much more likely that a title insurance company will now insure that title because that risk of someone else showing up later has been effectively eliminated by the legal warnings going out. So if you modify the foreclosure system so that it's court supervised, the property that goes into the land bank has more chance of being clear, insurable title. Whereas if you just have a land bank, you get the advantages of a common owner and you get the advantages of the back property taxes going away, but the land bank ends up with what we call junk title or title that's not insurable. So you have to pair land banking with judicial or what we call court supervised tax collection and tax foreclosure in order to end up with shovel-ready property or property that is ready for redevelopment as soon as you purchase it. It's not gonna have title defects, it's gonna be ready, you can get a loan, all of those good things that most homeowners enjoy. So with clear title, a land bank can work with communities to transform vacant properties according to their priorities. Say again? All lien holders get a warning, so that's part of court supervised process. They'll do a search for all the lien holders and make sure all of those lien holders get a warning, and if they don't take action upon getting that warning, then those liens are cleared. So all liens, all old notes from banks, and then the ownership interests of all old owners. So to illustrate this, I'm gonna tell the story of an imaginary vacant property in St. Louis County and what happens under today's system and what would happen under a system with court-supervised tax collection and a land bank. So imagine that this is a vacant property in St. Louis County and then it's owned by some California company. The California company, they stop paying their taxes, no one can get a hold of them, the problem we've talked about a lot tonight. This property is now effectively abandoned and no one is paying taxes. So what happens today? The tax liens on that property are gonna go up for auction and very limited warnings will go out. They might go out in some form, but probably not the proper form that meets the letter of the law. Then the property will go up for auction. Say no one buys it at auction, now it's on the post-third sale list. What would happen if we had a land bank and a court-supervised process? Before the property ever went up for auction, the county would sue the property. Now the court is supervising and making sure all of the warnings go out to the parties, the mechanic liens, the other liens, the banks, the owners. They're making sure those warnings go out and that they go out in the proper way. Now those parties get a chance to redeem before the auction ever happens. So there's a waiting period. If they don't come forward and take their property off the list, it goes up for auction. Now say again, no one buys the property at auction. What happens? It goes into the land bank this time, and the land bank now is the owner of that property. So say you're an individual or you're a community group, you want to buy this property and rehab it. What can you do? In the current system, as we all know, there's very little you can do, or it's going to take a lot of time and it's going to take a lot of money. So technically, you can buy that property. But first, you're going to have to pay all of the back taxes on that property to buy it off of the post-third sale list. And then, once you buy it, pay those back taxes, you're going to have to hire an attorney because you have that title defect problem. So all of those warnings didn't go out. Now you've got to hire an attorney after the fact, and basically what you're doing now is giving out the warnings that were supposed to go out before after the fact, and that's called a quiet title lawsuit. Some of you might be familiar with that. It requires an attorney, takes time, and it takes money. So you hire your attorney, you file a quiet title action, and then you have to wait, and then you'll be the free and clear owner of it if you have the time and the resources to do that. What would happen if there was a land bank? All you would do is go to the land bank, make an offer to buy the property. Once you buy it, you have clear title. You don't need to hire an attorney because all of those warnings, that stuff was taken care of before the auction ever happened, before the property went into the land bank. So it's much more likely that at this point, when you buy it from the land bank, it already has clear title. You're not going to have to do that quiet title lawsuit. And you don't have to pay any of the back property taxes because those all went away when the property went into the land bank. So once you buy it from the land bank, it's ready to rehab. So those are the two. That's the current system, and that's how it would look under a court-supervised land bank system. We also wanted to take a minute to acknowledge the history of redevelopment in St. Louis County, St. Louis City, and across the country. A lot of times, redevelopment as a term has been used to justify policies and practices that are really meant to take power and take property from communities of color and from Black communities in particular. That has happened countless times in St. Louis City and St. Louis County. Up here, you'll see some pictures. That's Mill Creek Valley in the top left, a neighborhood that was torn down in St. Louis City under the name of urban renewal. You see Pruitt-Igoe. You see a redlining map, which is where banks decided where they would lend, effectively locking Black families out of home ownership. These are all policies and practices that at the time were termed as redevelopment, and what they really were was removing property and removing power from the communities who needed it the most. We want to draw a contrast between those types of policies and practices and what land banking is meant to do. So land banking is really meant to return control to the community over the problem of vacant property. Right now, like we talked about and like everyone had some frustration with, you have very little control over the vacant properties in your neighborhood, especially if they're on your block, they're next door, it's really frustrating. There's not a lot you can do unless you have the time and the resources to navigate this complicated system, to hire attorneys, to pay back taxes, all of that stuff. A land bank is really meant to be a public entity that responds to the community's goals for vacant property. Because it's a public entity, it's more transparent, it's more accountable. It's the place that you can go to offer feedback, to offer ideas, or if someone else comes, a redeveloper or company who wants to buy up properties, all of that's going to be public record, and you as a community member can offer your feedback on that idea or that plan. So that's the advantage of having a land bank over the current system. All right, now I'm handing it back to Representative Windham to talk about next steps.
And let me just say real quick, I answered you all's questions purposely the way that I did to show how frustrating our current system is. So I answered it to say there really is nothing we can do under the current system that we do have. There's not a whole lot that we can do. Our power is very limited. So I just wanted to put that out there. I wasn't deflecting. I know, I can see the frustrations, oh goodness.
Y'all hear me? I don't know if it's, okay, I think it's back on now, y'all. All right, so I had nothing to do with Shantae antagonizing y'all with her answers to the questions. But this is, so I saw some hands go up. I don't think we have time scheduled for questions again, but
Feel free to find me after the presentation if you want to ask questions.
Maybe we should just answer one or two of the questions.
well, Mr. James, can we talk after? Is that okay? I think a couple of the panelists might stay a little bit after too, but we got to go ahead and wrap this up. So I'm a bad host. I gotta be the bad guy right now, but we do have a piece of paper at y'all seat, and y'all can write down any questions, give them to me, or just give them to me. I'll stick around for a little while, and I'll make sure y'all get the answers to those questions. But this is the fourth time I'm seeing and hearing this presentation, and I feel like I learned something new every time. So if y'all would, can y'all give them a round of applause for being here and presenting that to y'all? So, yes, I'm gonna get to that too. So I feel like they made me sound smarter just because I had a part in this. So that's why we had this coalition. It's because I didn't know all that, and I just came back from Jeff City today, and it's a lot going on. I got one person that works in my office, so none of this would have been possible without all the partners that came together for this. So, I mean, I'll take a brief second for the partners. That's right, they deserve a round of applause. I'm gonna name them too. So some of the partners just so far in this coalition is Beyond Housing, Community Builders, STL, the Spanish Lake CDC, STL Realtors. Big shout out to Charlie and Terry. And a part of me wants to skip the noticing, recognizing the elected officials because they might get jumped on. No, it's for y'all's sake, Councilwoman. And I might miss somebody, so I might get jumped on too. So, let it go? Okay. Well, I will say one of the only elected officials I think that didn't answer a question is Councilwoman McBride. So thank you for being here as well, Councilwoman McBride. We got some county council people, some mayors, so we got some powerful people just in the room. I feel like we can get some things done on many different levels. So whether that's on the local level or the state level, and that's where I came in, is trying to get some policy crafted for the state level that would enable the county to enforce a land bank. So that's where I came in. And then I found out it wasn't so easy. I told y'all this a year ago where I started this conversation. I said, oh, well, I need to know that too. We need to bring them in too. So 6-8 months later, this is where we are. It's still a lot of work to be done. So stay tuned. And we have this meeting here will be aired online on Beyond Housing's Community Conference, September 25th. At 12:30, online on Facebook Live. Our next event for this specific collaborative will be October 5th at 6 p.m. via Zoom. And y'all have some of those handouts at y'all seat as well. So you have survey at your seat, a survey handout if y'all would complete that for us, and it'll allow us to be able to stay in contact. We have a glossary full of terms, and then, of course, if y'all have any questions, feel free to give them to me, and I'll make sure we get some answers. Not from me, because I probably don't know the answer, but I'll make sure we find somebody that does know the answer. So sorry to cut off the few questions that we had left, but come and see me and give me those, and we'll get those answered. So thank y'all for being here, and I don't think I missed anything. Okay, thank y'all.